Okay, this is another episode of Open Letter to Ordinary Human Beings, and this is the first one I'm doing solo with one guest. David Inman is a fraternity brother. We both played Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity at Henderson State University sometime in the 80s, from what we can remember in the 80s. I attended HSU on state scholarships and Pell Grants because uh, came from nothing and just elbowed my way to the table with all these, you know, uh, what I regarded to be fancy people, and David being one of them. But I regret that we didn't know each other because a little better because I kind of had this big wall of anxiety because I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like an imposter. So anyway, hopefully we can catch up and amend some of those mistakes now that from my youth. And I want to touch base and tell David that man, I appreciate it's an enormous debt of gratitude because you guys came along at a time in my life when I really needed it. So I am eternally grateful. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective about college because I don't know if you remember or not, but we met because you were my RA, my resident assistant in the dorm. So that's when we
Yeah,
met. So probably, yeah. So seventh floor of Newberry,
yeah,
and yeah. So we literally met probably, one of my first days of college at all.
yeah,
But it's interesting to hear your perspective. It always is because my impression of you and what I remember was just the opposite of anxiety and low self esteem. You were just different to me, but it was a confident different. And I would describe you more as almost like laid back. Like, yeah, I'm kind of weird out there, but that's kind of what I'm going for. So it's always interesting to hear the different perspectives for sure.
yeah, man. That's great to hear. And I may say some stuff that seems a little too confessional or intimate or whatever, but I don't want you to be alarmed because when I say these things, I kind of want to put a perspective into to help other people who've been through some stuff. Um, for me, I have benefited enormously for passing as white because I look white. I look whiter than most white people, uh, but I'm not. I'm half Puerto Rican, and because of that, uh, my mother was the 11th of 13 kids born in Ponce, Puerto Rico in like 1936, and just born into dire poverty. And she led a very hard life. And I describe her to my big brother, whom I last spoke to in 1971, as being sort of a feral psychopath who outgrew her psychopathy. As she got older, she became more compassionate. But she had five kids, and I just learned this like a couple of weeks ago, and I'm 60. The only other kids that I knew about was I missed my big brother and my big sister that I last saw in 1971. And so, you know, the quickest way to summarize it is that she was a prostitute. So if I watch Mad Men, I relate to Don Draper a lot because I kind of grew up until about age six in a whorehouse, off and on. And my dad was a charming criminal. He was married seven times. He never divorced my mom, and he was older when he had me because he had had another kid that I didn't know about until after he died. So it was just a crazy, fucked up family. But he did a very noble thing. When I was 18, I was worried because he'd been using methadone because he was a heroin addict uh, for 12 years. And I was afraid that the methadone was going to kill him. And while he was still young enough, he was 56, I wanted him to move back home so I could go to college so that his parents would have someone to help take care of them, drive them to their doctor's appointments. And he had a massive heart attack and died suddenly. So when you guys came along, I had a year under my belt of college, knowing that I was good enough and I wasn't going to flunk out. But I knew from my old man talking about my social anxiety that the most important thing that I could get out of college was getting to know people and make some friends and maybe miracle of miracles, land a girlfriend by some, if lightning struck. So it was a lot, and for you guys not to blackball me because I was such an odd cat, I still don't know how I made it through the process because you guys must have fought like hell thinking this dude's just too weird or whatever. But if you did blackball me, I understand it and I forgive you. But if you didn't blackball me, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I came along after you, so obviously I had nothing to do with that.
Okay, see, I couldn't remember. I'm all
Yeah.
scrambled up.
No,
Okay.
I'm a year behind. I started fall of '85, so I'm
Oh
probably a
wow.
year
See, I
behind you.
didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started fall of '83. Yeah. But anyway, while we were, I was going through all that, I remembered your dad, and your dad struck me as being very cool and very friendly. And what I wanted to ask you in general uh, was this thing about I noticed you posted a list of books that you had read um, in for last year, which is 2025. And I thought, I read and I listen to audiobooks all the time, but it never occurred to me to post it. So, what got you into doing that? And is there something you've read this year that you could recommend?
Yeah, so interesting. I've been thinking about that, and so I guess the number one reason that I kept a list was that I read a lot of series. So I really enjoy a series where, there's several books and kind of a one particular character, is threaded through there. And mainly just to keep up with the last book I read. So I read several series, I'll alternate between back and forth between different series and just to remember, okay, which one's the last one in the series I read so that I can go, grab the next one or whatever. And so that was how it started, um, just to keep up with what I've read. And then also, even as books pop up, and I'm pretty much just a digital reader. And as books would pop up, I couldn't remember if I'd read it before or not. And I've even, read the same book twice and forgotten about it. As a matter of fact, I'm on a book club Facebook group that I posted a review of a book, which I don't do very often. But and then a couple years later posted a review of the same book, and someone else in the group had pointed out that I'd posted a book before and I didn't really remember reading the book. It's one of those things where it's like, I think I remember this, but I'm not sure. And if you read a lot, and especially I read a lot of the same type of book, they can get you know conflated pretty easily. But that was it. Part of it too, honestly, is out a little bit out of arrogance. If I read 3 books in a year, I wouldn't post that on Facebook. But if you read
No.
60, that seems like a lot. And then part of it too is just discussion. And that piece of it worked the best because a few comments people made were like, hey, yeah, I like this, try this book, got some great recommendations out of it, that sort of thing. I really tried to focus on reading in 2025 to get off my phone. That was the main
Yeah.
thing is that I noticed just mentally that it feels a lot different to read for an hour than it does to scroll for an hour. Uh,
Yeah.
and so really tried to if I get the urge to pick up my phone, pick up my Kindle instead.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I had another thing I did in college because I knew I was weird and I was raised as an only kid, even though I missed my, big brother and big sister, which is a whole other, thing. I don't want to go down that road too much right now, but um, I had a friend in my last year. I always wanted to keep roommate, even though as an RA, I had the choice that I could just have a private room because that was part of the deal. And most RAs did that. They just wanted their privacy. I guess because they, wanted to be able to bring girls up, and good for them. If they had any gain in college. I totally understand that. But for me, it was important to have like different roommates like every year to kind of get out of this thing. And I'll tell you the one thing, um, even though my dad, he was a World War II, he was in the Navy during World War II and Korea. And when he went in, he was all, Yankee Doodle Dandy, waving the American flag. And when he got out, that's when he really kind of became what society would call a fuck up, alcoholic, you know, uh, different addict, went to prison, stuff, But he was great with people. He walked into a room and, everybody lit up. And before I left home when I was in the ninth grade, because I was running with kind of a little bit of a bad crowd and I didn't have any money and I was mooching weed off of these kids that hated me, which it was really pathetic. A lot of, self-hatred, self-loathing on my part. I knew I wanted to go to college and I knew I wanted to try to make something out of myself, and I did. Now, luckily, I was able to have a decent career in law enforcement, zero sustained complaints, was able to help a lot of people, and followed my dream in Hollywood with my wife. And we wanted to break in as screenwriters, and that didn't work out. But anyway, going back to the thing that my old man, the charming pimp, taught me about people not even meaning to, that has stuck with me, and I think about it probably every day, is he looked at me when I was a kid there and so goofy, like 12 or 13. And he said, "What's wrong with you? When I was your age, I was writing girls long love letters." And so now when I write, I just think, okay, I'm writing. It doesn't have to be a girl, it can be anybody. It's like all my writing doesn't have to be this fancy erudite, trying to prove how smart I am stuff. It just has to be a love letter to someone. So, and then I kind of try to infuse that in everything. And then one of these roommates, like I was talking about, he was an older guy. I don't know if you ever met him. Does the name Joe King ring a bell with you? I bet it
It,
probably
it
does.
does not.
A few cigarette parties. He was older. He was 25. Blonde dude, little cool little, even though it was the 80s, he had a cool little 70s mustache. And he had survived a stroke when he was 14. So he had survived a near death experience. And Joe said, we were talking about books or something, and Joe said, you know, I guess it's an old saying, but I've never heard it before. He said, there's two things that change people's lives: the people you meet and the books you read. And that's always stuck with me. You know, this is a guy that, I have no idea. I don't know if he's dead or alive or whatever, but just that little things we get off of other friends, even if they're not even if they're just barely more than an acquaintance or someone you just know for a short life, they really stick with me. So when I read now, I feel like I'm elbowing up to the table with other possible writers, and it feels like, oh, a friend of mine wrote this. What do I think about that? It's a whole different. It only took me, to age 60 to think in those terms, but it's I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, because it leads to this next question. And I remember we did a little prep before the show in terms of things to think about that I'd asked, was there a book that your father had read or read to you that is still one of your favorites? Or if that just never came up in your relationship with your dad, is there something that you've read and that you wish that you could recommend to him because you think he would have enjoyed it?
Yeah, and I was in my probably mid to late 20s when my dad passed away, and such a different person back then, and wasn't even really, I don't think, an avid reader. Certainly not an avid reader. I may have read some, but reading sort of as a hobby and as a mental health tool certainly came on later in life and kind of comes and goes. But yeah, and thinking about that, I know both of my parents read a lot, and I didn't. I probably didn't read my first book until after I was out of college, and that includes books that were assigned in high school, college, that kind of thing. I just kind of never did. But I uh, I don't really know or remember or paid attention to what type of books he read. My mom passed away just a couple of years ago, and so I'm more familiar with, her reading. And I guess she used, reading as a coping tool her entire life. She told stories about going to her grandmother's house and being in the basement where there were just unlimited books and just spending all summer, in the basement where it's cooler in the South and just reading and escaping and that sort of thing. So, all that's to say, I don't recall what type of books he enjoyed. I do know that he read a lot. I can picture uh, very much my parents sitting at our sort of eat-in kitchen table on either end, just both reading a book. Um, and I can, when you bring up my mom, that's the immediate picture that comes to mind is her sitting in her chair at that eat-in kitchen table reading a book, and she would do that often all day long. It was not uncommon for her to read an entire book in a day. Probably the ideal Saturday for her. But anyway, I did read a book recently called Theo of Golden that everybody's talking about.
Let me jot that down. I always keep a little.
Yeah,
Theo of Golden. Is that spelled
yes,
the way it sounds?
yes, it is.
Okay.
And it was all over Book Talk, and it is not at all the type of book that I would typically read. And I downloaded it and didn't get to it for a long time, and then finally started it. And that's one of those books that, I mean, it definitely lives up to the hype. It's a great book to me for sort of the times we're in now, or at least the times I'm in now. It's a book basically based on kindness and just sort of has a little bit of everything. It's got a little bit of romance, a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of drama, all of that. Um, so, yeah, so to answer your question, I would definitely be interested if my dad were alive today to have that conversation and would love to tell him that the main character, who was sort of had a foundation of kindness, really reminds me a lot of my dad. Uh, just in the way that he approached people and his interest in people, and from a very non-judgmental way, and just intrigued by eccentricities, whatever that word is. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool. And it's very cool that you recognize the kindness that your dad had because I think a lot of people just take it for granted or they don't, it doesn't click, when kindness is just there. It's just taken for granted. It's so easy not to even acknowledge it. I met my wife uh, online because we both wanted to write for Hollywood. And we had these different it was uh it was a website from a producer who was one of the producers for the social network, don't know if you ever saw that movie, the
I did.
Aaron, yeah. So Dana Brunetti, and it was called Trigger Street, and we just really clicked. She had a real wonderful emotional maturity when it came to reviewing material because reviewing another writer's material is an art unto itself.
Hmm.
And so I'm just like the luckiest dude because she's, we're living here in Europe and life is good. But one of the we would sometimes I would start little projects that would kind of get a life of their own. And one of them, I suggested that we write a series like up to 18 or 20 6-minute shorts, movies, something like Parisia Tame. Or I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the movie
I am not.
Parisia Tame?
I am not.
Well, Parisia Tame had all these different filmmakers, and they made this series of like little 6-minute mini movies around the theme of like love in Paris. So I thought, let's do a bunch of 6-minute mini movies around the theme of kindness. And it meant a lot to me. And that was like, oh God, I don't know, close to 20 years ago. And it was one of the best received, screenplays once I edited everything together and put it in sequence of who did what. So yeah, I think and myself as an agnostic who is more of a humanist than anything, uh, I think that happiness and kindness are things that we can will ourselves to do almost no matter how bad the circumstances are, because for somewhere I probably just as a rebellion mostly against my mom because she was such a miserable person. Uh, I decided a long time ago that I was going to be happy. And if anybody, I would say to myself, I'm going to be happy. But if you're going to be miserable, that's on you. And I think that just unconsciously as a defense mechanism very early in my life when I realized I'm going to have to be the adult here starting around age 8 and be like the parent in a dysfunctional family. That's why I was an RA in college, other than, it was a good gig and I was on a state scholarship in Pell Grants, and that's how I got through and why I became a police officer and all that. That kind of, understanding that I had to take care of or feeling like that it was my role to take care of others. And kindness was my number one tool. I mean, not in a form of manipulation or anything. It's just um, I really do believe that life is too short and that I'd like to help people. And I was good at what I did. I was just lucky, you know. And anyway, there was the other question that I wanted to get to.
One
The
other thing, one other thought
the
that
you know
popped
you
into my
recommend
mind.
your dad Theo of Golden.
Yes.
Okay, do you remember who wrote that?
I don't. I think Levy is his last name. Maybe Alan Levy.
Okay, I'll check it out. I'll look it up on that.
I
You
tell you
probably
one other thing that came to mind though when you were talking
yeah
about your dad and coming out of the war and how that
yeah
affected him. And I wonder because my dad served in World War II, and I
yeah
wonder if he kind of did the opposite. He went down the mental health track, right? So he came back
yeah
from World War II, went to college on the GI Bill, got a
hmm
master's and then a doctorate, got a master's in counseling and then a PhD, and then went into the mental health field, was a counselor, his entire
yeah.
career. And I wonder if that was just kind of the opposite, instead of that affected him, that he came out instead of going down a self-destructive path, if he was like, I've got to
Well,
help people kind of thing.
I think your dad emotionally matured faster than my dad did because my dad eventually became a counselor. He eventually became a substance abuse counselor. He would help people right out of prison find work if he could. And when he was a substance abuse counselor in St. Louis under the CETA programs that were much maligned by President Carter, they employed a lot of people who had been in prison before as substance abuse counselors and so forth, and helped them get the education they needed, like in community colleges, so they could be certified as counselors and all that jazz. So my dad was a substance abuse counselor as well. So, and he never spanked me or anything, and because I think his dad did, and it made him hate the whole idea of just spanking. So I would get lectures. And my grandmother said, "Oh, Robert, why don't you just beat the child because the lectures are worse?"
Hmm. For sure. Yeah. And I can remember growing up,
But
there was a
yeah,
blue
but
chair.
it,
There was a blue chair in my parents' room that if you were in that chair, you wanted to be anywhere else in the world but in that chair because that's where
yeah,
you sat while they sat on the bed and you had a counseling session. But
yeah,
I bet there was a counselor therapist in your dad's life that affected him such that he decided to become a counselor.
yeah,
And my
yeah. I
dad
think
was,
so.
I've had several people that have told me that my dad was that person for them that are now
Yeah,
in the mental health profession. And because of my dad is why what encouraged them to get into that profession and help other people and that sort of thing.
yeah. That's very cool. I was going to share one more thing about my dad and his because it's so hard to box the compass. Because if I tell you the worst shit about him first, then people are kind of surprised about the stuff that's kind of cool. He loved Truman Capote and Truman Capote's writing, which I didn't appreciate as a kid. When I was a kid, I just thought Truman Capote was this drunk idiot who would, go on Dick Cavett or whatever and try not to pass out. But I've developed a profound appreciation and love for In Cold Blood, even though people, literary critics or whatever, would say that he lied about it being 100% nonfiction because he made up some scenes. And I would rationalize saying, yeah, okay, he lied, but it may be the most beautifully written book of the 20th century because of its stunning clarity. So have you ever read In Cold Blood?
I have not.
My dad used to read In Cold Blood to me back in the 70s, imitating Truman Capote's voice. Which is,
Okay.
if you've seen Capote, I don't know if you saw the, Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance, but so he kind of like had this thing like in the atmosphere where he kind of recognized great art, even if I didn't appreciate it at the time. He also liked the Beatles and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Love that song. And had had his own crazy experience tripping on acid that I remember about when I was a little kid, but we got through it and I survived that obviously. But so, yeah, I mean, if you've never read In Cold Blood, I mean, for me, that's the book I've read the most. And for me, it's important because I think if you're going to study human beings at their worst, that it's almost like a forensic tool into looking at how a psychopath is formed. So yeah, In Cold Blood is just chef's kiss. I read it probably or listen to the audiobook every other year, just to get back in that voice and mindset that Capote had.
Cool. Yeah, I wrote it down. I'll check it out.
Okay, cool, man. Uh, well, we'd only scheduled like 30 minutes, and we've gone a little over. And I don't want to take up too much of your time because you still have you got a real job. You've got a day job.
I still do.
And this is my job, what we're doing here. So thank you for donating your time to what I'm doing now. And if you find yourself in the Netherlands, want to grab a pint or hit a coffee shop or both, and whatever, man, I would love to you know talk to you whenever you're in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. And it's on the list for sure. Yeah, my wife and I are trying to make a trip over there once a year, and so it looks like Portugal is this year.
Okay,
Got some
cool.
very dear friends that just moved to Barcelona uh, permanently, and so we're swing by Spain quite a bit. But yeah, Netherlands is definitely on the list. So I'll definitely hit you up. Uh,
Yeah, and I love both Portugal and Spain, and Barcelona is something special and some very, has a very cool vibe, and so does Lisbon. So anyway, man, thank you so much for your time and take care.
all right, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.